Yeah, that's rough. I had to plow my driveway this morning. So.
I was telling them I was wearing a tank top a few hours ago.
Oh, wow.
Here.
That's ecosystems at the same time.
Yeah, one nice thing about this job that gives me an excuse to go south in the winter. It's, you know, the best time to visit California.
All right, friends, hitting record. About to get started. All right, it's Thursday at 4:20 p.m. Eastern. That means it's time for Office Hours, AROYA's weekly session for cultivators to hear from the experts and talk to each other about what they're seeing with their grows. My name is Keisha. I'll be your co-moderator today, and I don't do it alone. How's it going, Mandy?
Hey, Keisha. Wow, can you guys believe it? We're already on episode 47. It was 2 weeks off. I really missed this. So we're live here, and we're also going live over on YouTube. So wherever you're tuning in from, make sure you send us your questions, and I'll make sure I get those over to the team. One quick announcement before we get started today. If you're going to be at the Emerald Cup, be sure you catch up with Keisha. She'll be representing AROYA out there. And we do have a very special guest grower on today's show. And for that formal introduction, I'm going to throw it back over to Keisha.
Awesome. Thank you, Mandy. And yes, I'll be at Emerald Cup, as will Seth, my good friend. Seth, tell us who we have in the building, as it were, today.
We got Mikey here, Mikey Giersch. He's do you call yourself the head grower, cultivator, manager, jack of all?
I'm the grow systems manager. We have a head cultivator that's just above me. He's a very busy guy, but he did actually jump on the chat today. But I'm our grow systems manager and the head of the fertigation IPM department, as well as anything equipment related on the floor that deals with the plants themselves.
Absolutely. And that's, I guess, part of why we got to start talking. It was fun to look at the graphs and start spotting when things started going wrong. Then I get to hear from Mikey, how'd you guys solve it out in the desert? And that's always interesting.
It's great, getting together and talking shop for it to try to correlate, what we're dealing with here to what you guys are experiencing personally and with other clients.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just, having that insight and being able to look into, I don't know, your facility, it doesn't really, I guess I don't see anything that usually doesn't surprise you ever. It's more, like, hey, that's what that looks like on the graph there. But it's fun to solve those problems and see what's out there. I know you've spent a lot of time dialing your place, really getting it dialed in pretty tightly, especially considering, the temperature swings that you experience out in the desert there.
Like we were batting around a minute ago, we go from, 120 plus in the summers to, the low 40s and high 30s during the winter seasons. So we have quite a bit of a vast change there to deal with, especially keeping up with our ACs during the summer seasons is pretty rough challenge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I guess while we're at it though, let's kind of start. What's your background? How'd you get into growing?
I've been growing, since I was a teenager. Call it the family business. And then I just applied and pushed until I could get into corporate grow. I started out with the guys at Mojave Cannabis. I was with them for a few years and was fortunate enough to work with a lot of great growers and awesome people with that company. And then as Vertical came into the landscape, I transitioned over here for a little bit more room for advancement. I've been with Vertical a little over 4 years now, working my way uphill. Spent a long time as a bud tender and patient-to-patient grower doing 30 lighters and stuff like that prior to getting into commercial cultivation.
Yeah, so you've seen it all, basically.
Whether it's definitely rockwool, aeroponics, flood tables full of silica pellets,
Oh yeah, you kind of got to try it all to figure out what works at some point. That's no one arrived straight at rockwool and cocoa right off the bat. We had to start with soil, hydroponics, all that fun stuff. How do you think the industry is changing, right now, like versus a year ago? Because we went through, kind of a huge push. Like when you first started growing, it might have either been in the ground or in pretty big pots, I'm assuming, back in the day,
15-gallon pots, getting these 5 foot tall plants before you flip them, trying to get as much mass as possible.
Yep, exactly. And then now, it's totally different, right? Like we're looking at small plants, small containers, moving up to the slabs over the years. That was like a huge thing. I think that's revolutionized the indoor game for a lot of people. Even compared to the Hugos, just the amount of plant you can get off of a slab efficiently and easily is pretty impressive.
a lot of the guys I talk to running the slabs now are just they're flipping plants at 11 to 13 inches instead of 18 to 24 and running 50 to 75% more plants, generating 20 to 24-inch tall plants at the end of life to just cut the difference in plant volume size versus number of plants in the room.
Right. And that's a huge thing I've noticed lately is, people are finally embracing going to a little bit smaller plant size, trying to go to a lower pruning technique that gives you a little more mass on the plant, but also, I mean, that time in there trying to mess with it is brutal.
Yeah, the plant maintenance cuts down so much. That's the ease on your team is the biggest factor that comes in with that, with minimizing your plant size.
Oh yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, labor is like one of the biggest costs because it's so variable, right? Like we can kind of count on power prices roughly within a month. We can count on water. If our labor is all over the place month to month, that makes it pretty tough. One emergency can add a lot of labor cost.
And thankfully, we're in a world now where we have all the appropriate equipment where we can start actually accessing and analyzing the data and quantifying what we're doing, so we can say grow wedding cake that isn't 7 feet tall.
Right. Exactly. Yep. And having a recipe to stick to, especially in terms of irrigation that you can execute day after day after day. I know one huge thing that I've noticed that's been pretty cool compared to talking to, and just back in the day, knowing a lot of people trap growing and stuff, especially kind of out in sticks, power outages. You can grow in facilities now where you can pull off a whole run without, any power. Maybe you got some internet interruption, but your equipment's reliable.
Yeah. The infrastructure improvements over the last decade have been phenomenal in Southern California. I mean, like 10 years ago, we were looking at 3-day-long power outages out here in the Mojave.
Right.
You were lucky if you were able to keep some of your food. It's 110 out at night.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, don't open the freezer.
Yeah, don't open the doors. It's hotter outside.
Actually, Michael, I have a question. Can you describe your facility? What's it like?
So we have 2 separate grow buildings on the property out here in Needles. We have a 2-story where we run LEDs across the entire building. And then we have a 1-story building with an additional 9 flower rooms and 2 veg rooms where we're running dual end 1,000 watts. Gotta keep that old industry feel in there. Still gotta have that high yield production from that far red light.
Oh, there's nothing wrong with that.
It feels too good to let go of. Yeah, I mean, the LEDs are wonderful, and 2/3 of our property is transitioned to LED across the board. But there's something about those high pressure sodium lights that you just can't let go of yet.
Oh yeah, they're a little different, and I mean, I don't know, the biggest downside I've seen out of those over the years, and it depends on where you are. Obviously the heat, but like, where I'm at in the winter, that's pretty welcome. But just kind of the ease of use, and they've been around. They're not expensive, and in the world of LEDs too, I find sometimes it's everything's so competitive. There's always new tech coming out. At a certain point, it's like what's adequate versus what's the pinnacle, because there's always going to be a shifting pinnacle, but we've always got an adequate baseline that works, right?
Yeah. So far we've had very good luck with the Gavita 1930s. They've been wonderful fixtures for us. We've had even light production, very little diminishing, in production and for actual, intensity throughout the rooms over about 2.5 years now. We're still running pretty strong. We've only lost, less than 2% fixtures over almost a 3-year period.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think those perform great too, especially when you've got a room that was built for HPS. You got a little bit taller ceiling. It's a better direct bolt in without, I don't know. That's always disappointing to see people switch over from 1,000 watt HPS to like a 700 watt LED when they're like, oh, I got to lower my lights. And it's like, yeah, you're going to have to fine tune that now. That's just another thing. So there's definitely merit in using the old tech.
Well, at least we're in a world now where people are more brushed up on what's happening with the lights. So you don't have, early on with LEDs, you had a lot of people purchasing like what they were being sold because there wasn't enough market data on the lights themselves yet. So you had a lot of companies producing like 315, 340 watt lights that they were guaranteeing commercial yields with. And a lot of companies got shot in the foot by that early on, buying those 340 watt lights and thinking they were just going to drop them down on top of the canopy and they'd be fine. They got, big veg plants instead, flowers.
Oh, yeah. Well, and when you look back at it too, they kind of initially put some of those LEDs and even the T5 fixtures in like gymnasiums and stuff,
Yeah.
you know, arenas, because they're replacing HID lighting for like sports arenas. And it looks pretty damn bright in there. You know, it's still hard to look at a 350 watt light without glasses on. It's not good for you.
Yeah, but if you don't have the science behind it and have the actual data on what it's putting out, then you're not aware that it's still too little.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the same thing even goes for, you know, some bigger greenhouse grows where you go and you look up and you're like, wow, the lights are like 14 feet up. Yeah, I get it. That's like where all my purlins are. That's where everything lines up. I can strap them up there and it's easy. But you might want to get a light meter and kind of dial it a little bit, you know.
And that one's a great rule of thumb for if you can just look up, your lights aren't bright enough.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. But, you know, that's it's taken more and more science over the years to establish that. You know, we kind of always knew like, hey, you get better production in warmer, brighter climates, right? But greenhouses came along not to be the most controlled indoor environment ever. They've always, you know, until cannabis came along, basically, at least in the US, they've been built to be just enough. You know, what's adequate? It's always farmer mentality, and that still carries over into cannabis, but we do have a little bit better margin to work with, and I think a higher interest in ensuring crop quality compared to a lot of vegetables, for instance.
Absolutely, yeah. And you look at a lot of the vegetable markets, and there's such a high waste rate for what they produce. Like, I mean, there's all these ugly food markets opening up for a reason, because the huge majority of what's produced goes to the wayside because it's not even aesthetically pleasing. And then we can move past the amount of it that's just goes straight to the garbage because it's not actually adequate in style and fashion. Like its construction, its base form is inadequate in size, in flavor, and just overall fucking composition.
Right, exactly. So when you're dealing with that kind of market and spoilage, you know, like you can only put so much into a tomato because you know you're going to lose 20 to 30% potentially, depending on where your market is and, you know, your resources to get it off the vine in time. You know, if you've got indeterminate tomatoes and you can't pay harvesters to go out every day, you know, in mid to late summer, like, well, you're going to lose some tomatoes. That's how it goes.
Well, that's been another wonderful thing working with guys like Josh that's on the call with us today, and learning more about nutrient balances and getting to talk to the guys that have been in the industry, you know, much longer than I have, and being able to learn about their experiences and start quantifying what I'm dealing with based on what they're, you know, providing for us. Being able to work with that information moving forward has really been a wonderful fucking thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Having good resources, and especially people that are, you know, experienced in what you're actually growing specifically. Like with cannabis, there's so many over the years, there's been so many nutrient companies out there. And then there's so many, you know, case specific situations. What's your water quality like? You know, there's certain nutrient lines that like probably are going to be tough to run if you have poor quality, or tough to inject. And, you know, there are a lot of different problems that can arise from that. Or, you know, just like anytime you can talk to someone who's gone through it before, you don't have to make the same mistakes. That's what I value about meeting with a lot of the older guys. You laugh about irrigation system problems, or mainly irrigation system problems and water quality issues. You're like, wow, we've got enough background now to actually solve some of these issues. There's resources.
We're past the world of water wands and octo bubblers.
Oh yeah. Well, and you know, just even injection systems, you know, like if you look at the breadth of designs over like the last 10 years, that every year people are getting better and better. And it's, you know, part of it's because that on a commercial scale, people hadn't been doing it with this small of an injection system indoors, like high volume outdoor, like say some big berry farms or produce farms in Southern California with these huge injection systems. When you've got a 6-inch pipe and a lot of water flowing through it, that's a little bit different mixing. You know, with these smaller systems, it's taken years of people essentially finding all the weak spots. You know, what is the best way to line your dosatrons up? Yeah.
Yeah, how much space do you need for appropriate mixing in a 1/2-inch line?
yeah, and I've seen a lot of different solutions to that, screwed to a bunch of different walls, and I can tell you there's a wide range in success. So it's definitely, it's nice to be able to like have some reliable resources like that. I know Josh and Ramsey help a lot of people out, especially on the nutrient side, and that's great. It's an awesome resource.
Michael, I have another question for you. You're the growth systems manager there, and I'm hearing just so far you've talked a little bit about like kind of bridging that gap between like just kind of the legacy techniques and data. And so I would love to, like, your role as growth systems manager, is that part of what you do, is kind of bring in some recommendations for things to adopt in your facility?
Yes, our head cultivator, Orion Santana, does any calls go through Orion. But it's my position to try to research and provide the best routes that I can, so that when that call's made, it's one with appropriate research and appropriate backing behind it. And as well, it's fortunate he's also an industry, longtime industry grower, has had clone companies in the past, currently has Orion Genetics, if anybody's looking for some fresh OGs out there. But it's great to be able to work with him as well, to have somebody else that has a decade plus of experience in the commercial industry to be able to help make these calls with and throw stuff against and have it bounce back. But bringing in new science, bringing in the information from these guys and putting it up against what we're being told from our ground level growers, because working with your team is the only way to succeed at this level. Like, having a wonderful team and working with what your team's feeding you is the only way this can work. So a lot of your ground level guys don't have access to the same information we have right now. They don't have the time to get online and research and read. Those guys are busy busting their ass while I'm sitting in a chair, So it's about bridging that gap between the information we're being provided and working it into the old fashioned style of growing, and trying to integrate the newer practices into what we've been doing that we know is successful, and then channeling that data back uphill through Seth and through Jason, and trying to find a way to relate that to what other people are dealing with and create new programs to try to advance what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you guys get to do a lot of cost benefit analysis on things coming in, and then having tools really allows you to analyze what you were doing before. And at the end of the day, I always like to tell people, it's half science, half art. The art part is you, the grower, knowing, it's not necessarily knowing the pulse or the feel of your plant, although a lot of people like to put it that way, but it's being able to look at it and tell if it's healthy. Is this plant responding to what I'm doing in a positive way or the way I want it to?
And when we're talking indoor cultivation, there's so many individual factors that go into each grow space. We have 31 flower rooms here on property, and every one of them is a unique environment.
Yep.
So these guys ground level have to have a feel for every individual room and the plants of each strain in each room, and how they're going to react to that unique environment.
Yep. And I mean, a lot of it just comes down to problem solving on a daily basis. You walk in and go, hopefully you don't see any plants that look bad, but if you do, why? We have to fix it, no matter it's, years and years ago, teaching some people at the place I work that had just come on about calibrating. Like, okay, we got to calibrate our pH meter. We got to calibrate our EC meter. Like, why? Well, it gets off pretty quick. It doesn't take long to calibrate, guys. And if that's wrong, like, we can chase our tail for a while, Like,
or even as simple as, having a couple of different temperature sensors in your rooms.
Yeah.
You might have a hot spot that you don't know about.
Yep.
That's why you're crisping out. You're drying back 10% more in that area and don't realize it.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. No, I've totally hung a dehu and then came in the next morning and be like, and we torched like 6 plants. That's cool, guys. But it was like, at least that one was an obvious one. If we had like made it harder to see that we're blowing a blow dryer at those 6 plants, we probably wouldn't have figured it out that quick, because immediately it was shocking. It was like, something must have gone horribly wrong, and it had. But if it wouldn't have been the person who put that dehu in the day before that walked in, I don't know. If I didn't, be like, oh shit, who knows?
That's a stopgap that comes up frequently in commercial cultivation now, because it's your ground level cultivators are far too busy with all the challenges that come with this industry to get in and do your maintenance these days. So you have maintenance guys, which is a wonderful thing that the industry's progressed to that point, that you can bring in talented individuals with that specific set of experience. However, they're usually not growers. So it's something that you have to have that solid communication across the board with your team, to have that information available all the time. Like your growers need to know when a new dehome went up,
Yep. Well, and I think a big thing for a lot of growers, and especially their staff, is trust. Establishing like, hey, if something, looks bad, tell me. Don't, don't keep it a secret. Don't think anyone's going to be upset because a plant died or whatever. Like, no, we got to solve the problem. We need to be aware so that no one's operating on some premise that's false.
I'd rather dump out 300 gallons of mixed nutrients than have you send a bad mix to a room.
Oh, absolutely. Or, just
Every day of the week.
In my experience, when you have like too complicated of a mix and you go away for the week and you come back and there's just a pile of powder in the bottom of the res. You're like, okay, so clearly we need to simplify. 6 parts is way too many for the weekend crew to mix, I guess. And it sucks that that's reality sometimes, but so that's that risk analysis, I guess. You're quantifying how much of a risk you want to take when you can simplify and make life easier sometimes.
Joshua just posted a comment in the chat.
Yeah.
Josh, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and speak to it, but speaking to the importance of calibrating the CO2 sensor too. I'll just read it here. We find so many out there off by 500 plus ppm. Yeah, Josh, you want to go ahead and speak to it?
Yeah, no, it was a comment when he was talking about calibrating sensors. Nobody ever thinks to calibrate the CO2 sensor, and we find those off so many times that it's pretty crazy. But I mean, if you think you're feeding 1,000 parts per million, but you're actually giving toxic levels, those plants start looking really weird. Nobody knows why. And there's so many times I've gone into facilities and like, yep, that's CO2.
Yep.
Or the other way around. 800 and they're actually giving 200 and the plants are just starving. But you can play around with that to like intentionally affect transpiration rates, right? Like you can go towards the higher or the lower ends, depending on what your setup is for dehumidification. If you don't have enough, you go to the higher end to try to keep it down a little bit, vice versa. If you need to get a little more transpiration going, but you don't know what you're doing if your sensor's not accurate.
Yeah, you're just chasing your tail, right?
Exactly.
Unfortunately,
that's one thing I see. Oh, go ahead, Mikey.
I was to say, unfortunately, that's usually the piece of equipment people spend the least amount of money on in the grow. So it usually swings the quickest.
Oh, absolutely. Especially like the cheapy Trollmaster ones and little wall mount. If you spent less than $1,000 on your CO2 sensor, expect to calibrate it weekly.
Oh yeah. I mean, at least, and also just my favorite. I talked to some people a while back that they'd ended up buying like 15 of the Walmart hygrometers. Like you're just confusing yourself more, man. You're plus or minus like 5%.
Throw that little white square thing away.
Yeah. The more you buy, the less you should even trust those. And that's
I do this for a living. I spent $5,000 on a good quality temperature humidity CO2 handheld. And I mean, if you do it for a living, there's no point in playing around with little $20 devices. Like just pony it up, get the run with it.
Yeah, and that's the pH sensor or pH meters are one of the other conversations I have with people. Sometimes they're like, I don't want to spend $2 to $3 grand on a bench top. And I'm like, I'm not saying you have to, but if you want to be real accurate, this is where that's kind of where we're starting the conversation, and it goes up from there. And you do have to calibrate those more than your cheap one says to calibrate it. But if you want accurate results, that's the reality of what it takes.
Yeah.
We got a question here in the chat from Big Cypher asking, can you recommend a CO2 test product for calibration purposes?
I'm going to actually refer to Josh.
You can find gas cans out there that the gas inside the little tank is at a certain specific part per million. They use them for the life safety test. So you see, like when you set up a new facility and the fire marshal comes by to do his test on your CO2 life safety equipment, that's what they use. So you have to look up where to pick them up, but they're out there.
Well, there you go. Thanks,
awesome.
Josh. Appreciate that.
I have another question. I'm sorry. I'm a passionate cannabis consumer. So Michael, I want to hear about those genetics. What's going on over there?
So being a larger facility, a chunk of what we have to do is cater to what's hot on the market. Like most people in the commercial industry have to do these days. We are trying to bring in more OGs, try to get some more of that gas back around. Like I said, Orion Genetics, right now he's working with some King Louis and some old Star Killers to try to bring some of that old funk back into some of the newer strains, maybe slap a fresh coat of purple on one of them and get that old nose out with a little exciting color for the market. Across the board, like many people, we're running a lot of gelato related strains right now, and a lot of runts, crosses, and your basic staples for the current sales market. We transitioned away from the old fashions, your wedding cakes and things that were previous hot industry staples, to try to find something that's a little brighter right now, just to keep up with things, as we all have to do.
Have you guys tried to work on bringing the flowering time down on some of those older OGs?
Yeah,
like that?
that's something we're trying to tune in a little bit, trying to work on whether it's a little bit more generative as we come through, like generative a little earlier in the life phase with a little higher light intensity through the finish of the flower, but something to try to increase that maturation a little faster in those. Try to avoid anything over 9 weeks as best we can.
Yeah. I mean, that's about all you can do sometimes, is kind of select out of there and hope, when you're doing your back crossing, some of them come in a little shorter. But I was just curious. That's been kind of my dream for years, to really work with some OGs and some diesels and get them down to that 8.5, 9 week range. I haven't been able to do it yet with my own crosses. I did some auto diesels. That was pretty fun, but that doesn't really count, I don't think. not for a short flowering plan. That's different.
I did a lot of playing around for a couple of years with a male of a Ken's GDP cut, and that one just, I spent too long trying to hunt the perfect pheno and never kept any of it.
Yeah, and that's what happens. I mean, that's one sad thing about the way cannabis genetics work. You can go the traditional route with plant breeding, really work on some lineages, or man, there's a lot to be said about synthetic breeding, basically open pollination in a room for a few cycles and see what you get. It might be messy on the paperwork, but you can get some really cool results out of it. So it's, I guess, it has a lot in common with apple breeding. But I always think that's fun. Pheno hunting's a blast. I would love to be in a situation. I loved working at a plant breeding company. I bred peas. Not quite as exciting as cannabis, but
it's still exciting. You're trying to bring out the terp in those peas, man. Get that
exactly. Dude, purple flowers, man. That's what we're looking for all the time.
So Mikey, when you're shooting for these desired characteristics, like what are the considerations from a data standpoint? What is the kind of stuff that you're looking for, your team is looking for on a day-to-day basis to make sure that you're moving in the right direction?
So for commercial, anything we try to run commercially, we want to look for something that's going to give us a couple of key standpoints. We want something that's going to have a bright enough terp profile that it's going to hold in a jar for a while. I mean, we're all competing on shelves in the end game, so we have to have a product that after a little while is sitting on the shelf, when you crack that open, you're still going to get that bright floral aroma flowing out at you. And a lot of these wonderful strains we've been running for a long time are only good from your trapper because you got it 6 weeks after harvest at best. And with the current cannabis industry, it just doesn't work out that's how quick that flower gets to the consumer. It typically takes 3 months is a very short period of time in the current industry for your product to hit a shelf, and more likely you're looking at 6 months. So we need something that's going to have a bright enough terp profile and a strong enough terp profile to hold through that period of time. And then something with a well enough consistency in the bud structure and in our overall flavor for the smoke that the consumer is going to want to come back and grab another one. So, I mean, like I said, a lot of gelatos. It's a wonderful base strain. It's got a real bright floral, fruity terp profile, little bit of purple, frosty as hell.
I can comment too, Keisha, and say anything that makes it to the point of going through that QA test. It's probably looked pretty reasonable on the graph if they've had a sensor in it. If they've blown it up to the point where they're trialing it, I know that's a consideration they're looking at as well. Like, is this a plant that's reasonable to grow, or are we breaking our butt to just keep it alive here? There are some finicky plants that you're pheno hunting just do not work in your facility like they can if you can run that whole room at that pheno. But
yeah, that's, fortunately, having the number of flower rooms we do, we are able to monocrop most of our rooms.
Yeah, that's awesome.
However, it's still it is the trick, like you said, of finding the best strains to produce enough volume and still hit those other standpoints for you. Like it has to have all the ticked factors for the consumer, but it still has to produce a volume to make the corporate office happy. We still have to make money and keep the lights on, right? Like everybody wants to go home with a little money at the end of the day.
Oh, absolutely. I've grown some strains that I personally love to smoke that are semi-dwarfs, or at least the phenos that I ran into, and that don't work on a commercial basis. Why? Because you veg them for 5 weeks and they still don't get very big. They're just a semi-dwarf plant. They won't get big, so they're not really worth it. However, we might be hitting a point soon where there is that, heirloom market for the home grower, which is I'm excited for. I think we're going to see a lot resurface from there, and then maybe allow some breeders to kind of push some popularity there that they can then push out into the commercial market from there.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of the guys bring in, widows and trying to find the old skunks and get them thrown back at the bottom end of their lines as best they can to bring that old flavor back into things, get that brightness back out.
Oh yeah, it's out there. And, some of these traits, when you start to look, I noticed Big Siphy asked about good breeding info resources for a beginning breeder. Just classic Mendelian genetics. Just look at a book about basic plant breeding. Go back to Gregor Mendel. It's pretty simple, and take it from there. And then when you study it more, you'll learn about, things like genetic recombination and, gene linkage, things like that. Where does it actually apply to you as a breeder? It's learning about those statistics and trying to figure out, okay, can I predict based on the lineage I'm looking at, will I be able to predictably make a cross? And if I make that cross, will the trait, excuse me, try not to sneeze, will the trait I'm looking for be 1 in 10, 1 in 20, 1 in 240, 1 in 10,000, and that's where things are starting to get super exciting for cannabis, I think, is we're working towards being able to search for those 1 in 10,000 phenos, like actually do a synthetic out to F4 and say, all right, we're doing a 10,000 seed run here. Hopefully we got one of the perfect expression that we're looking for. Money's making that hard for people right now, but we're getting there. I think you give it another 5-10 years and there's going to be a better legal structure for breeders, especially if we get some federal legalization, better legal structure for breeders to actually, create IP and protect it in a more real way. Right now, like with licensing agreements, you can do a little bit, but at the end of the day, we need Supreme Court backing to finalize those property rights.
Well, and with the way that the market's going for large scale cultivation right now, where I think we're pretty quickly here in the next couple of years going to see a transition where we have our, your Budweisers of cannabis and your micro brews of cannabis. You're going to have your small, garage style grows that are producing your micro brew cannabis that's coming out at a boutique quality level. And then we're going to have a lot of mass scale corporate cannabis that's competing with each other for, the middle or the low end of that boutique scale. Yeah.
One thing I do think it's going to be interesting that at least that I see on the genetics side is when we're talking about, breweries, for instance, a lot of those breweries, big and small, depending on, if they're brewing, obviously you got your Coors, your Budweiser or whatever, that's, they're brewing like just lagers and super cheap ingredients. But then you've got a lot of mid-range when, Sierra Nevada, Dogfish Head, like all these nationwide Sam Adams micro brews that are, not so micro anymore. What we're going to see, I think, in genetics is some breeders are going to lean more boutique, but at the same time, the same qualities are good for both types of producer. So like, if you've got a plant that's, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It evades me right now, but there's one strain I used to grow that was just incredibly mold resistant. Well, that's good for everyone, not just, big producers, not just boutique guys. Like there's some great boutique growers I know that struggle with HVAC issues for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it's not just money being able to put in. It's like, oh, the building you own is 100 years old and it's got limitations. You're putting caulk in between the bricks and stuff. Like,
there was one genetic called, I think it was called Slimer. We tried to give it mold, could not. The thing just would not mold.
Yeah.
It was popular down in that Salinas Watsonville area for a little bit. But
yeah, I mean, it's hugely valuable. Mold resistance right now is, I mean, I'm sure you could echo that, Josh. I talked to a lot of people. That's one of their biggest struggles.
Yeah.
You know, that as they hit the ceiling with yields, and then now they're growing mold. And
yeah,
it's
exactly.
bad.
And there's definitely breeding work to be done there. Like there was this Cherry West genetic that we had back when I was working down in LA that we couldn't grow it commercially because it would pop naturally for pyrethroids because it grew them itself naturally. You couldn't give the thing tests if you tried. We'd like sprinkle spider mites on it, wouldn't work. You just couldn't. So there are those traits out there. We just got to kind of combine them and select the right ones. Yep.
And it takes space, right? Like, I mean, I personally would love to get a research license.
Phenotyping systems like the like that PhenoSpecs thing. You line up some plants or there's what was it? I can't remember what the other one was called, but there's one where every single plant gets a load cell, a runoff measuring spoon tipper. It gets EC sensor, volumetric water content, temperature, blah 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 blah, oxygen, everything. And you can tell, within a couple weeks, things that normally you would have to wait for the yield to determine, your overall photosynthetic rate. You can figure that out in, a week. And if you know that, you know how fast the plant's going to grow. Stuff like that. So it's out there, but it's expensive. That's, a small room setup with that system is like $250,000 or something like that, I think. So it's not cheap.
No, and that's just so you can predict a crop. What happens if it's growing too slow? Do you rip it down?
Yeah, exactly.
One thing I think that's going to be interesting, Phylos, they kind of tried to start it with their cannabis genome network or map that they're doing. But, just with the timing coming out of the dark ages, we'll say, the old black market, it's going to take time before we can really compile all that information, and I know when I talk to different breeders out there, it's like, well, where'd you get those genetics? And some of them are honest, some of them aren't. A lot of them got them from a person and they don't know where that person got them from. So we're dealing with, when you look at the chain of custody going back with seeds, it usually doesn't go like 30 years is a long time these days. 40 years is a real long time. I don't know anyone who knows much about seed history before that, So it's going to be a while till we figure this out, till they identify markers. I know there's a company here in Pullman that's been working heavily on a powdery mildew resistance gene, and they've identified a few markers. That's a start. That's a huge start. They probably need to get access to thousands more samples and hopefully identify those same genes in other cultivars or varieties and figure out, okay, where can we actually source some of these resistances and have, source material that we like to work with, not just say this one plant that is pretty marginal on the terps, but it never molds. Like that's maybe not the best breeding stock always.
Not the best marketing strategy, right?
Right. And it's just hard. Like, even with the amount of F1 hybrids out there, there's definitely been plenty of times on a pheno hunt we pop seeds. Hey, this one's supposed to be mold resistant. Well, I'm sure one of these phenos is, but how many test grows do we have to do? How much do we have to blow up these 20 seeds and also have all these different phenos? So now we're putting most of it to oil. Like it gets to be an expensive process trying to identify that stuff.
It's all about playing that long game. Michael, I have one more question for you. And then if you and Seth are down to answer some of the live questions we came in, we'd love to hear your feedback. But, you got into cannabis as a teenager. You're doing it at Vertical. We're in California. It's been a wild couple years. 2022 has been crazy. Just like wondering what any advice you'd want to share with the folks out there, just to kind of keep them hanging on and hang in there and looking forward to the future.
Just keep pushing forward, man. It's all we can do in this industry is just keep pushing forward. And you have to weather the storm right now and trust that there's enough of us that care about the industry moving forward in a quality way with good product and appeasing the consumers as patients, because that's where it all starts is, flower medicine, man, trying to keep people moving forward in a healthy way, even if that's mental health and you're just trying to chill out, like that's still a necessity, and that's a little better for your body than booze, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
There's enough of us pushing to keep this a quality industry and to stay away from the your base corporate standards that a lot of the other industries have fallen victim to, where it's about higher production and lower quality at all costs.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I do a fair bit of work in Canada, and that's what we've seen up there. Canada obviously has a much smaller population than like even California, but they had when they legalized, it was federal, so all the provinces got it. Well, green explosion, a bunch of these big commercial operations did not put out quality. They went for quantity, market got flooded, and now you've got 20 to $40 million facilities that are being sold for 10% on the dollar, basically, because they put all this investment in, but were not able to turn a profit as a company really in the first few years. And we're a bigger economy. We're having a slower rollout. So like that's going to happen over and over in different states as time moves on, especially because we're probably a ways away from interstate commerce. We're not going to enjoy the same luxuries that winemakers enjoy for a while. But I think as the market gets educated in the US, we're seeing a turnover back more towards quality, especially, you're always going to have like you said, your Budweisers, your Coors of the weed world. That's going to exist for sure. But I think it's also, especially because there is the whole medicinal aspect to it, there is a bigger demand for quality cannabis than there is compared to, say, the beer market. That's just kind of my opinion, I guess. Maybe there's some numbers out there that'll prove me wrong. But even when we look at, the Midwest, for instance, where I come from, people there now are way more educated than they were 15 years ago, in terms of like anything about cannabis, what are quality indicators, what are they looking for? The whole culture is changing. So I think we're, like you said, to keep moving forward, as long as you stay in it and you've got the right attitude. And also, this business attracts entrepreneurs. If you are an entrepreneur, like you got to put a lot of efforts in a certain place in order to be successful. And right now, as long as you make sure your business plan is good and your cost per pound of production is low enough that you're going to be able to survive, that's what's important. Just be realistic about it. Gone are the old days of getting super rich real quick off of cannabis. It's farming at its core.
Well, the longer we have legalization, the more people we have getting a broader experience with products. So we have people smoking, the terpless purple wave, right? Like stuff that has great jar appeal, but once you crack it open, there's no nose on it. Its structure is not that great. It's there just to look good behind the glass.
Yep.
And you have a lot of consumers that start with that stuff. Those are your cheap eighths and cheap grams to pick up. Maybe it's a pre-ground ounce. Who knows how you grabbed it first. But the longer you spend in the industry, you're hanging out with your friends, you start smoking a little better product. If you're interested in continuing using that product, you're going to start looking for better versions of it. Few people are going to stick with the cheapest, worst version of what they find. And the more consumers we have gaining more experience, the more consumers we have pushing for better product.
Absolutely.
Michael, you literally just explained my trajectory into the cannabis industry. It's like, were you there? That's so great.
we all started with Mexican red hair pressed into a brick.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you got to break up a pound of the hacksaw.
You're like, is that a rock? I'm like,
I'll smoke it though.
Oh,
You guys, I'm in Texas. It's still too real for me. So come on, it's too soon. I'm just kidding.
Amazing. That is awesome advice. While we have some time, let's go ahead and get to some live questions. Big Sci-Fi, I see you turned on your camera. That's perfect timing. You had you had a question about hypochlorous acid. Let's talk about it. What's going on?
Okay, I do. So I'm in the process of setting up a precision drip drain to waste. I will be hand mixing batch tanks. And my question about hypochlorous was, how long does it stay active in a solution in your batch tank?
That's a good question. I would not think a whole lot beyond 24 hours.
Okay.
especially at the kind of the concentration we're putting it in. Particularly if you have an open top reservoir, that's going to gas off a little easier.
Sure.
And like at our facility, we're manufacturing it on site, so we don't have the excess binders that are in a lot of your commercially purchased products. So we have typically less than 24 hours to get that run through because we're venting that a lot faster.
I see. So would you recommend using that? Like for they talk about using it for adding oxygen to your reservoir. It kind of doesn't seem like it's really worth it if it's only going to be there for 24 hours. Or would you recommend mixing a fresh batch tank every 24 hours?
So in most big commercial applications, you're going to be mixing that fresh batch tank every day for that room. And that's part of where it comes in. You're mixing that hypochlorous in, and then you're doing your bulk of your feeding in the morning. So like if I go in at 7 a.m., I'm going to be feeding at 10. I'm going to mix that tank up starting at 7:30. I'm going to have it fully mixed by about 8:30. Have that hypochlorous in there. That's going to kick on an hour and a half later. Most of my irrigation water is going to be in the morning for my P1, or I can do it off of that tank if I want to. And then it's not going to be as effective the rest of the day. But the point is I get that hypochlorous flush at least once a day. If you're not going to be, if in your situation that res is going to last several days, you might not need to add it every day. Add it that once, make sure you run it.
I would not be concerned with it. Like the point of it is to sterilize, right? So if you've got a closed top reservoir, you add it in there when you make your reservoir, then there's nothing alive in there, right? As long as you keep it sealed, you're good. Putting it through the drip lines, if you're using a good clean salt product and not shoving a bunch of carbohydrates or sugars through drippers like you shouldn't be anyways, then there's not really anything, as long as the tank was made right and you don't have a bunch of chemicals reacting with each other, there shouldn't be anything to clog drippers with. So I don't think it needs to be run as a continuous feed in most batch tank setups.
Fantastic. That is awesome clarification. I will be using Athena Pro also. So
cool.
No extras.
Why?
Perfect.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, here's the other thing. Well, I know why Josh
we are a
asking.
small startup, and Athena is super easy. So we're
No, I get you. A lot of people use it. It's a decent product. I'm just
gonna take my hat off
because I have my own.
Big siphon. Big thing though. Make sure your res is in a dark spot.
Yes,
if you've got light on that and you're staying mixed for a few days, it'll definitely grow some algae and a few other nasties in there, especially if you have, not a good seal on it.
And it does have its own room, so that won't be an issue.
That's going to be pretty good. Yeah, especially if you can keep that temp under 70 degrees, if your feed water is 60, 65 or so, you'll be golden on that.
Yeah, or just wrap a blanket or something. Right?
Yeah. Just make sure it's not getting light on it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Follow Netafim's directions.
Don't
no
use
surface
Schedule
water
40
feeds.
PVC in underneath lights or anywhere there that you can't have light. That white PVC is not opaque, and algae will grow inside it. So if you do have Schedule 40 pipe already and you don't feel like ripping it all out and putting in Schedule 80, then you can just get any color latex-based paint. As long as it's latex-based, you can use white even. Just paint that pipe. It'll block the light.
Right. And I did go Schedule 80, so that is good.
Oh, perfect. There you go.
Thank you guys.
That's why we run the hypochlorous acid daily in our drip lines, is to avoid the buildup of biofilm in our white PVC lines.
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
Perfect.
If you got white, it's tough, but painting that would be something I'd put on the to-do list for sure.
Yep, that's a great idea, Josh. I like it.
Thank you much, guys. I always appreciate your help.
A lot of farmers out there in regular ag went with the the cheap, not even Schedule 40, but like IPS 120 or something like that, 125, and we'd get all kinds of calls when I worked at Netafim. My drippers are clogged. Your guys' drippers suck, and go out there. Yep, they got an algae farm in their pipe, so
yeah,
it's all over.
Yep. Well, and if you have any light in there, we got a hot nutrient soup out there. Light and contamination are enemies.
Especially if you're growing cannabis and you have kind of a higher phosphorus level, those algal blooms hurt in rivers and whatnot. But, the higher your phosphorus load is, the faster that algae grows.
Yep, exactly.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Big Cypher, thank you for that question. But also, we legit have 3 experts on today. Orion logged in. I don't know if we can say we have 4 experts. I don't know. Ryan wants to say anything today. But Mandy, I know we've got some questions in our YouTube. We want to get those taken care of today. I'm going to throw it over to you.
Oh yeah, it's been pretty hot over on YouTube. So I'm gonna hop into these. Dr. J303 wrote in, I don't keep mothers, so I have to veg for 6 weeks. How can I slow their growth to control height?
Lower temps, less intense light's probably going to make them stretch. But if he's going from seed, is what I presume he's saying, if he has to do a 6-week veg, or are you cutting off your last round before you flip them? Is that where we're at with it?
Well, let's see if they write in with a little bit more context. But we did have a couple other questions, and I'll go ahead and move on to those. So yeah, air expansion paragliding wrote in, hi, I'd love to talk about CO2. Their first question, is it beneficial to exhaust CO2 out of a room during the dark cycle in flower?
I don't find a huge necessity to do that. I mean, if the plant's not using it and you have a sealed room, it's going to stay in there. It's obviously not going to use as much CO2 at night because we don't have photosynthesis happening, but I don't really see a point in wasting it. As a greenhouse grower, I would have loved to have been able to not exhaust CO2. So I could be fairly biased in that.
Yeah, if it gets to the extreme, you can have problems just with the, when the lights first fire up, they may just keep their stomata closed entirely if that CO2 gets to toxic levels after they've woken up. So it depends. If you're over 3,000, sure, vent it out. If you're, if it's getting up to 1,500, 1,800, don't worry about it. Just let it
run. That goes back to calibrate your sensors, right, Josh?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
We are hitting a point in time where hopefully you can direct inject CO2 and not use burners. I've definitely seen my fair share of problems with burners and them going a little wild.
Oh yeah, not burning the gas right, and then you
exactly
carbon monoxide and all kinds of other shit in there that causes your plants to go crazy. But the
people there.
That have you heard of those that ag gas company? They basically do the old greenhouse trick that I used to do at Netafim when we were building international houses. It was you take basically drip tape, but the heavier wall, like they use in orchards and whatnot, and for 20-year drip tubing, and run that through the top of the canopy, and then have the CO2 gas run through those drip tubes, because they do regulate the flow of gas just like they do the flow of water, so you get a pretty even distribution, and it gets dumped right into the canopy, so that it doesn't just go off into the exhaust. And I mean, we did it outside a couple times with actually good results. I mean,
interesting.
If you get a real still day and you pump it out, a couple times throughout the day, and let them have just that little bit more, it does make a difference. So that's it's an interesting thought to be putting CO2 out where the air exchange is happening every hour, but it does work, and CO2 is cheap. So why not?
I've talked to a few guys who've done the drip tape trick with mixed results. However, sometimes I wonder how bad their temperature stratification is in different greenhouses too. Whether you have
enough sensors.
Probably. If you
one in a 5,000 square foot bay, they have one temperature sensor that controlling everything. It's like, come on, guys.
Yeah, exactly. And how well does that stay put? If
120 foot long greenhouse, because they didn't know the first thing about designing for wet walls.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, that's what you see out there. I mean, one thing I will definitely say is the cannabis market has kind of caused everyone to rethink how we go about HVAC control in growing systems.
Yeah, well, and like you said earlier, the greenhouses in the U.S. For traditional ag, up until very well, other than like howlings and stuff like that, the greenhouse industry in the U.S. is just like you said, it's just barely good enough, right? They're just trying to keep rain off it for the most part, because the climate here is so mild that we don't need high-tech good greenhouse designs. But you go to other parts of the world, and I mean, the greenhouses can keep a tighter climate than we can indoors. It just depends on the style, especially those semi-closed greenhouses like the Howlings one. They tried to patent with Kubo or whatever, the Optic Climate or whatever it is. But I mean, you can get a better result that way because you have constantly perfectly conditioned air just being blown up past the plants every second of the day. So there's definitely some new technology that cannabis is helping make more widely available and widely known to the ag industry as well. It's pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I mean, before getting into cannabis, the only blackout greenhouse I had seen, well, outside of research at universities, was
the mums.
poinsettias actually.
Oh yeah, okay.
But up here in the Northwest, they're a big one. And guess what?
For sure.
Those people haven't switched to growing weed. They still make a lot of money on poinsettias.
Oh yeah, they'll make more on that long term than we probably will on weed.
Wow, is that where the real money is? Oh wow, I'm writing this down.
They have access to
specialty
banks.
crops that do far better than cannabis as far as profit per pound. Some of them the labor gets like saffron or something that you can't grow it here because the labor is just too expensive. It all has to be harvested by hand.
Yep.
Very true. So, man, the amount of experience in this room. You guys know this is amazing. I love the energy, and thank you guys for sharing all of your experience with this. We have so many topics going on, but oh my gosh, sorry, we have a lot of questions. We had a second follow-up question from Air Expansion. They wanted to know, sometimes when my tanks run out, my room runs at 150 ppm for a day or two. Is this harmful to the plant?
It's, in my opinion, lost production time for sure. Any amount of time in flower when we're depriving the plant of, a key component when it needs it, it's lost production time. It can't build sugar, can't build structure without carbon. It's not ideal. That's for sure.
Awesome. Thank you for that. A couple more questions over on YouTube. Diane wrote in. So can you ask Seth what kind of school or course you take to learn everything that you know about crop steering? What kind of resources do you have at your disposal, or what kind of schooling did you go to?
Well, I have a degree in plant science and horticulture with an emphasis in urban agriculture. So that is pretty specific for high intensity urban farming. That was helpful. Before that, I worked in research for about 7 years, working with breeding peas, garbanzo beans, wheat, and then doing agronomy trials on field crops. So you stare at a lot of dirt and you mix fertilizer with the dirt and you plant seeds in it, and then you harvest a lot of seeds every year. But then beyond that, going into greenhouse cannabis production, well, starting in my basement, like a lot of us do, and then moving up into commercial production when I had the opportunity, and staying in that for about 4 years. What that allowed me to do was look at a lot of what I knew about plant science and production techniques in vegetables and other high intensity crops, and then start to apply those to cannabis and know what I was looking for in terms of plant morphology responses, and that I feel like is what really allowed a lot of this stuff to kind of click for me. Like, hey, here's what's going on. And then also the biggest thing I think that helped me was working in plant research, particularly agronomy previously, and being forced to, the way I found out about Meter Group in AROYA was years before I got into cannabis. I would install remote weather stations in wheat and barley fields using meter data loggers and transmitters and sensors. So for me, it was like, okay, we come in, if we have so much control, we can put this on a very, very, rigorous system. We can run a program very easily all the way through. Maybe not easily, easier said than done. But now we can look back at data from a whole run and quantify those results. We can actually pinpoint where we messed up and what we had success with. And that was something when I first came into the cannabis industry, I found, at least with the people I was working with, the tendency was to be reactive because we're always stressed about that next, the sale of this crop, basically. Everyone wants to fix, like, oh, something's wrong. We got to fix it. We got to fix it. We got to fix it. And learning to step back, do good crop registration, collect as much data, and look at a whole run, I think is what really got me here. And then everything else kind of follows. You start noticing all kinds of small different details. And that's about it. You can have the education, but you've also got to have the experience. Again, it's half science and half art. So you've got to study and you've got to apply.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Diane also had a follow-up question. Can you give me more information about PGR? And is it going to pass cannabis lab tests? What do you think about that?
I don't know, Mikey. I don't think anyone tests for PGRs that I've really seen out there.
As far as I'm aware,
Oh, yeah,
California is one of the
do
most
they,
strict
Josh?
markets.
What do they test for specifically? Do you know?
Well, like Paclo or something, like, the ones that everybody knows about, the phospholode, shit like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen people use the chlormequat chloride, which was a portion of what was in that phospholode. That plus Paclo was basically what it was. But there are some out there that the only ones that I would ever be okay with anyone using, though, is like the kelp one, just spraying kelp. It's got natural amino acids and whatever in it that basically does kind of the same thing. But most of those PGRs are all about stopping vertical growth. We have better ways of doing that with crop steering than we do with PGR. Like, I can get a plant to stop growing vertically a lot faster with steering than I can with a PGR. So it's,
and that's
I never personally got to use them. I was, I didn't talk about my growing forever until I got into the commercial industry, really. So I didn't even know what phospholode was. I always thought it was just watered down monopotassium phosphate, so I never bought it. So I never got to really see like what how fast it does stop that stretch. But I have to imagine if I can get it to slow down to less than an inch every couple of days, then that's pretty good.
Yeah, and when we talk about applying those, my big experience with PGRs has been in tissue culture, actually. And one thing about it,
that's different.
One thing about it, though, when you apply any of those to the surface of a plant, especially a more mature plant, infiltration of those hormones or PGRs into the plant is actually pretty slow. So, like, it's like foliar applications. Can we get some things on in a foliar application? Yes. Is it as effective as through the roots? No. And with those sprayed on PGRs, you're affecting those surface cells, but to actually get them to penetrate and slow down stretch, like Josh said, you're going to be way more effective through crop steering and modulating what the plant's doing that way, because that is affecting that PGR condition.
Yep. We can affect those hormones other ways without using chemicals that are actually usually more effective. So
exactly.
It's kind of the whole PGR thing. And people think it's like a magic chemical you throw on there and it's going to make everything better, but usually it turns your product dog shit anyways. So it's kind of you don't really want to. And if we can use steering to get the plant to do what we want while still maintaining the best quality possible and keeping it clean and not giving anybody cancer, might as well, right?
Exactly. And it even comes down to, like, if we're trying to control powdery mildew or botrytis by some late flower spray, anytime I put any kind of spray on, especially if it's got an oil, an enzyme, anything else, I might have a surfactant, some other sort of dispersal agent. I'm spraying quite a few things on that I probably don't need people smoking.
No, exactly. No, I don't spray anything after week 3, week 4-ish. Just don't do it. And then,
I love the argument. What if it's peppermint oil? It's like, you want that on your weed?
Little Christmas bud.
I'm not trying to smoke peppermint.
Exactly.
You guys, I'm so glad that growers out there care about this stuff these days, because in the past it hasn't been so much. So yeah, we still had some questions.
I like to smoke my own. You kind of have to.
I can only imagine.
So I'm not going to make anybody else do it.
Exactly. You have high standards for a reason. So we had a couple more questions over on YouTube. Kevin wants to know, what would you do differently to try to have bud sides pop in early flower? I'm on day 22. VPD is at 1.3, 5 to 6 EC, 5.8 pH light is at 60%. And it says 345 watts. Or 645 watts. 8 inches away, hard drybacks, but only one plant out of 17 are showing. Do you have any advice?
Turn those lights up.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Turn the lights up. Get it? No, there's really, the dimming thing is a big. I don't know why so many people are so stuck on it. I mean, other than the fact that a lot of people took plants out of bedrooms that had 250 micromoles in a perfectly warm and moist environment, and then stick them in a flower room that's dry and hot, and quadruple the light intensity. The light intensity in itself wouldn't do anything, right? Like the plants turn their chloroplasts on edge, they let the light penetrate a little deeper, you get a little more light out of it, and there's no negative response. That's the short-term response. The long-term, within the next few days, the plant starts growing smaller and fewer leaves because it doesn't need as many to provide the energy it needs for the flowers. So you actually reduce a lot of your labor. You're not going to have to pull off as many leaves. You're not going to have giant leaves shading your buds. And if you leave that plant untopped, that naturally open structure of the plantlets is much light down in there as you need. We take like maybe 5 leaves off each plant, if that, during the right after stretch, and then we don't touch them again until harvest, basically. But if you have these low light levels on it, you're gonna have a slow metabolism, you're gonna have slow growth, you're gonna have stretchy growth, and you're not gonna get a lot of bud sites because the plant doesn't have the energy for it. So turning the lights up would definitely help, and don't worry about it causing them to get too big, because typically when if you have low light intensity, starting out, say we start out 2 plants same height, you put one under low light intensity, it's going to stretch up super far looking for that light. You're going to have a bunch of giant leaves because it's trying to capture as much radiation as it can. If you put, the other plant under, twice the light intensity, it's going to grow half as many leaves. It's going to grow more bud sites because it has the energy to, even with those fewer leaves. And you're not going to have as much shade going on, and you're not going to have as much stretching. You'll also, keep the top cola down because it's closer to that light intensity, and the side branches will reach to catch up, and then you wind up with that kind of menorah shape people are going for anyways with the topping, but without having to touch your plants. And every time you touch your plants, that's another possible vector for disease and pests. So that in lettuce they count the touches, and if you go over 2 touches per head of lettuce, they know you don't make any money. So they want to make sure that they only touch that head of lettuce one time. And it kind of similar in cannabis. If you count your touches, you're getting a very good analogy for what your labor bill is going to be. So if you that we only touch it once going from flower or from veg to flower, we'll do a little bottom cleanup, get the little shit off the very bottom of the main stalk, and then don't touch them again until put the trellis out that first day. Don't touch them again until they've done stretch. When you go in the room, just peek your head in, look around, make sure everything's okay. Don't if you're going into the crop and reaching in and doing stuff unnecessarily, then you're just increasing your chances of bringing bugs in, basically. A long-winded answer. I don't even remember what the original question was, but
no, that's okay. But you reminded me of something, Josh, since we were talking about the PGRs. That light intensity actually is huge in stopping stretch. If you can harden off your plants, basically take them from clone and really ramp that light up so you're matching DLI when you go into flower. Hugely important. Another factor there, light, it destroys auxin. That's why phototropism works. So when you have your apically dominant bud, that produces the most auxin out of any of those buds or any of those branches on the plant. If that's light is blasting it, that's actually slowing down that auxin production. When you're spraying to try to slow down, stretch, you're usually spraying a higher cytokinin concentration, which is antagonistic to auxin. So you're slowing down that auxin action. So right back to that, there's no reason, if you're using those sprays, there's a weakness in your system, or you might be trying to grow a freak genetic that's not good to grow. Those do exist.
Yeah, they definitely do. And you can get ones that, we may personally love the smoke of it, and it may be really nice, but it doesn't yield shit. And it takes 9 weeks to get there, or 12 weeks to get there. It's just, that's a hobby strain. Then don't grow it at a commercial facility, grow it for yourself.
I love sour diesel, but it just doesn't have enough structure and nobody wants to buy it. It takes 10 and a half fucking weeks.
Right. Exactly. That's one of those, keep it for yourself. But, as far as the commercial market's concerned, until people are willing to pay a little bit more for these strains that take a little longer, then, they just don't get them.
Well, and one thing I've seen, guys, that I try to encourage people to do, there's a few companies up here in Washington that I know that'll do a 10 or 11 week run. They just do 1 or 2 a year, do a limited drop, and plan their marketing to try to help them out with that.
And put it back to back with one of those, very few 56 dayers or something like that.
Yeah. Yep. Just, have fun with it.
That, so you have your 10 weeker plus your, exactly 8 weeker, and you can, you average out at 9 and you can still keep your total number of harvests you want.
Yeah. There's this whole hype world out there that I know, as a cultivator, I never really cared about. I was never really big into the Instagram world or any of that, and I probably should have been and should be more. But
I know
right there
you're
with you. The only reason I got one was because Ramsey made me.
I know you're not into it
He
because
said if you're gonna be in this industry, you kind of have to have one, otherwise nobody will know who the fuck anything is or what you're doing. Or
exactly.
Okay, I will say though, something that we've had to do with the LEDs out here in the Mojave, if it's if your lights are turned down for a heat issue, because that's something we deal with out here in the Mojave. You might have to cut 10-20% off your light intensity to get your heat down to a reasonable level and keep you from pumping out boof, you know.
There's always those emergency scenarios where an AC goes down, so you got to turn down the lights temporarily. But the key is to make it as temporary as you can, right? Like if you're having that situation every single summer, then it may be time to look at your AC load and maybe add another 5-ton or something, you know, just to make up for that little difference. Even if it doesn't run for half the year or whatever, at least during the summer, you know that you can keep your crop consistency where it's at, because eventually, when there's enough of this shit out there where, everybody's, starting to figure out where their little hole in the market is, what genetics they sell the best, where their market is, your consistency has to get better, because people are going to go to the store and want to buy the same thing that they got last time that was really good. And if they buy the same thing and it's shit, then they're like, oh fuck, I'm not going to use this brand anymore. They can't keep their shit together. So that kind of like, you can go to Belgium and buy McDonald's and it's the same shit. That kind of consistency is what I think will help a lot of people establish and maintain a brand, even without having to go into this hype, let's replace our genetics every 2 weeks thing. I think something to be said for dialing in a genetic really well and being able to produce that to a quality where people are like, I really like this genetic, and the only person that produces it really good and consistently is this company, so that's where I buy that genetic. Just random thoughts. I need to stop talking.
Oh, this is great. This is the future of cannabis. It's super exciting. Oh my gosh. But you guys, we blew through an entire hour and we still have questions. So we're going to have to save the rest for next time. So yeah, great discussion, everyone. Oh my gosh, Josh, come back on the show. Michael, please come back. Orion, please come back.
We could take one more.
You want to take one?
Josh is on a roll. Let's go.
We do.
I'm bored right now.
You want to do one?
Yeah. We do have one more. So yeah, this one's about leaf temperature. So Diane wrote in, how can I make my leaf temperature be lower than my room temperature by lowering relative humidity? I wonder why my room temperature is 85 degrees and my leaf is 83. Is there any way I could cool them off?
It should always be lower than your air temperature, right? Like if your plant is transpiring, then it's letting water vapor out of that leaf, right? Which cools it. That's your thermodynamics. It should be happy. If you have a leaf that is the same or warmer than the air temperature, then that means your environment is not good. It means that the stomata are very likely closed down because it's either too dry, too hot, too whatever. Could be a combination of your root zone plus your, like for example, when you're in the first 3 weeks of flower, right? A lot of us do a really generative program to kind of stress the plant out a little bit and get it to produce a lot of bud sites. Well, during that time, if your VPD drop or goes too far past that like 1.3, 1.4 threshold, I mean, those stomata will close on a dime, and they won't, the process and the hormone, the ABA hormone that causes that shutdown, it can be released instantaneously, but it takes like an hour or two to dissipate. So once those stomata shut down, they're shut down for a good hour at least, and you've missed out on that entire hour of growth and transpiration and nutrient movement and all that good stuff. So trying to keep your leaf, using the leaf temperature is a good way to figure out if your plants are transpiring or not. You want to see them somewhere between 2 and 7 degrees cooler Fahrenheit than the air temperature is. But again, it comes down to your sensor calibration, right? Like if you're using 2 different sensors to measure that aren't precise and for sure accurate, then you really don't know. It could be that one of them is reading 2 degrees cooler than the actual temperature is, and the other one's reading 2 degrees warmer, and so they look like they're the same when really they're not. But Yeah, the other
That's
long.
super important.
I'll let somebody else talk.
No, the theme of this episode is calibrate your sensors, everyone. Please.
Right.
Yep. Absolutely.
Like
Well,
quality equipment and calibrate it.
yeah. Well, and right there though, I mean, like we're just talking, leaf surface temp is really important. I get that question a lot. Well, how do I need to run my room? It isn't just as simple as do you have HPS or LEDs? How far are the lights away? What kind of leaf surface temps are we getting? What are we getting at, how high is your apical bud compared to the branches surrounding it? If that thing's like 2 feet higher, you need to do something about that, because we're going to have some interesting issues.
The bud temperatures can get really interesting too. That's another one that we kind of, if your bud temperature gets, I think it's like above 85, you wind up having some really interesting morphology pop up.
Foxtails.
That and just some
Loose.
overall goofiness. But yeah, the foxtailing is also we've found a lot of it just from overly vegetative bulking phases. People just get a little too ham on it and
late push.
And then you switch to flush or whatever at the very end. You see those new white hairs popping out when they shouldn't be. That's just you pushed it a little too hard.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say, we drop knowledge every week, but this episode was the knowledge dropper of knowledge droppers. Michael, Joshua, thank you so much for joining us. You have a permanent spot weekly. Feel free to join us every week.
If I can, I'll hop on.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful having you. And then Mikey, also great to hear more about your background and what you're working with. We love seeing you on office hours. It's cool just to get to know you a little bit better. So thank you so much for joining us today. Seth handled it. Thank you so much for holding us down like you do every week. And Mandy, thank you for co-moderating with me. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you to everybody who joined us for this week's AROYA Office Hours. We do this every Thursday. And the best way to get answers from the experts is to join us live. Reminder, if you have a topic you'd like covered in a future office hours session, post it anytime via the AROYA app. You can drop them in the chat live, shoot us an email to support.aroya@metergroup.com. Send us a DM over Instagram. We are also on TikTok. We are everywhere. So just send us a note. Let us know what's going on, what you want to know about. We record every session. We'll email everybody in attendance a link to the video from today. It'll also be on the AROYA YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and share while you're there. And if you find these conversations helpful, please do spread the word. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next week.
One more big was he asked me how to get in contact with me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let me just stop the recording.
Oh, yeah.
Y'all go ahead and talk. 1 second.
Jason's pretty good about hooking that up.